Okay, so we can call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the Southern Regional Advisory Committee here. It's March 19th, 2025. Before we vote on approving the agenda and the minutes from the last meeting, what I'd like to do is just have the advisory committee briefly introduce themselves. So my name is Fred Scharf. I'm a professor of fishery science at UNC Wilmington and serve as the chair of this committee. I've been on the committee for probably close to 20 years, but I've been chairing it for the last 7 or 8. So with that, I'll go this way. Go right up here, Ken.
Ken Sager. Commercial fishing for about 50 years now. I've sat on committees for the last 20 years. Been multiple grades and downgrades, these FMP.
Glenn Skinner, commercial fisherman primarily, currently executive director of North Carolina Fisheries Association, also worked at the Marine Fisheries for about 3 years.
I'm Jeremy Skinner, Southern Advisory Committee, second year now and representing the commercial fishing industry.
Sam Boyce, I'm recreational fisher from here in Wilmington, and I've been on this committee for, this is my 5th year.
I'm Mike Odegaard. I'm from Thompson Beach. I'm a fishing guide down that way. This is my first year on the committee.
I'm McLean Seward, biologist in the Wilmington office and co-lead on blue crab.
Robert Corbett, biologist out of the Elizabeth City office, illegal crab.
And I'm Jesse Bissett. I'm the Marine Fisheries Commission liaison for the division. I'm based out of the Morehead City office, the headquarters office. And I just wanted to thank everyone, advisory committees and public, for being here tonight. We really appreciate it.
I'm Coral. I'm from the head office. I'm the MFC admin.
Bruce Stewart, I'm a biologist in the Wilmington Regional Office.
Should we get Tom to introduce himself real quick?
We certainly can.
Is he the only one online?
He is the only one online, yes, sir.
Yep, Tom Smith, Weddington, North Carolina recreational fisherman, been on the this committee or the prior committee for 20 odd years.
Tom is also the vice chair. So we only have a single item on the agenda tonight, which is to receive a presentation on adaptive management options for blue crab FMP Amendment 3. And we'll receive a presentation from the division staff, and then we'll have some public comment. And then after the public comment, the committee will discuss and deliberate on the condition of blue crab, make some recommendations to the Marine Fisheries Commission. So can a member vote to approve? So Glenn's approved, Mike seconded. All in favor of the agenda as written? And then we met on January 8th in 2025. So the minutes from that were sent out to you as part of the package of materials you received for this meeting. So does anybody have any edits to the minutes from the last meeting? Tom, did you have any edits to the minutes from the last meeting?
No.
Okay. So hearing none, we have a motion to approve the minutes from the January 8th, 2025 meeting.
So moved.
Second. Okay. Mike, then Kenny second. All in favor of the minutes from the January 8th, 2025 meeting? Okay. Passes. So the first item on the agenda is just a presentation. And I think Robert and McLean are going to present that to us on adaptive management options for the crab FMP. And then when that is over, what we may start with is some clarifying questions from the committee first, just in case there are points of the presentations that they want some clarification on. And then after that, we'll open it up for public comment.
Fred, if you don't mind, do you mind if I give a quick MFC update prior to the presentation? So as a lot of you probably are aware, the Marine Fisheries Commission was scheduled to meet at the end of February in Kitty Hawk. Unfortunately, that meeting had to be postponed because of a pretty large snow event in that area, and just for the safety of everyone involved, like not having to travel through that, the chairman, Sammy Corbett, decided to postpone that meeting. It was held in Kitty Hawk, still in the same location, on March 12th and March 13th. But because we had to reschedule that meeting, some of the items that we had on the agenda kind of had to get moved in order for us to fit everything into that kind of compressed schedule. So the only thing on the agenda at that meeting were action items. It was only things that the commission was scheduled to vote on. Blue Crab was scheduled on that agenda for the February meeting, but it wasn't a vote. It was just an informational presentation to kind of let the commission know where we're at with Blue Crab Adaptive Management. But since it was removed, we still are kind of in the same timeline as far as bringing the adaptive management to y'all here at the advisory committee level. Sammy, the Chairman Corbett, has talked at the March meeting about the potential for moving that scheduled vote for Blue Crab from May, pushing it back into August, just so the commission does have the opportunity to hear the presentation about Blue Crab before the meeting that they actually have to vote on it on. So that's a possibility. It's still not set in stone yet. It could occur in May, but that's something that the chairman's currently weighing. And with that, I'll just provide a brief update of kind of what took place at that meeting. The commission did vote to move forward with the Amendment 4 for Southern Flounder. That's a focused amendment that is only kind of contains one issue. That issue is shifting the allocation that's scheduled to occur in 2025 of 60-40, so 60% commercial, 40% recreational. Amendment 4 would take that allocation and shift it to 50-50 in 2025, 50% commercial, 50% recreational. That shift is already scheduled to occur in Amendment 3 next year, so this would just be speeding it up 1 year. What the commission voted on is to send it out to the advisory committees and public review. And with that advisory committee review, we'll have to schedule an extra advisory committee meeting. So April 8th is when we've got the Southern Advisory Committee penciled in for. If that works with y'all, hopefully we can get that scheduled. Since we're having this meeting in Wilmington, that one would likely occur in Morehead City. But I'll reach out to y'all as soon as possible once we get all the details of that firmed up. In addition to Amendment 4 for Southern Flounder, the commission also voted on final adoption for spotted sea trout, FMP Amendment 1. The options that they voted on were for the recreational fishery, a 14 to 20 inch slot limit with an allowance for 1 fish over 26 inches and a 3 fish bag limit. For the commercial fishery, they voted on a Saturday through Sunday closure from January through September, and then a Saturday through Monday closure from October through December. And they also voted to formalize the stop net fishery management in the actual fisheries management plan. They also voted to adopt the adaptive management framework with the caveat that any adaptive management measures must actually be brought back to the commission for review prior to implementation. And lastly, regarding spotted sea trout, they voted to extend the fishery closure by 15 days for cold stuns to June 30th, following a severe cold stun event. And they voted to adapt the cold stun adaptive management framework. Regarding rulemaking, they gave final approval to amend and adopt 8 rules, and that's in 3 different categories. The first are some rules to simplify pot marking requirements. The next set of rules is false albacore management. And the last set of rules are regarding the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. And if anybody would like any more information about those rules, feel free to reach out and I can provide you as much information as you would like. They also voted to send a letter to the U.S. Secretary of Commerce in support of Amendment 59 to the Fisheries Management Plan for the snapper grouper fishery in the South Atlantic. And that is specific to red snapper, and that letter was in support of that amendment. They also selected preferred management options for the Eastern Oyster Fisheries Management Plan, Amendment 5, and the Hard Clam Fisheries Management Plan, Amendment 3. They'll now go for legislative review, and the commission is scheduled to vote on final adoption in May for those 2 plans. The options that they selected were establishing some deep water oyster recovery areas that would not open to the mechanical harvest of oysters, linking mechanical oyster harvest management in Pamlico Sound to the division's extensive culture planning effort, and determining the season length based on pre-season sampling of oyster resources. Also implementing a rotational opening plan for mechanical oyster harvest on the 10-acre culture planting sites. And regarding clams, they voted to implement a 3-year phase out of mechanical clam harvest from public bottom. And that does include any harvest associated with maintenance dredging. That's my update.
Okay, thanks for the update. Appreciate it. So if you guys are ready for the presentation, on the adaptive management options.
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to echo Jesse's remarks. I want to thank everybody for showing up today. Your input is drastically needed as we mold and form our preliminary recommendation that we will be giving to the MFC. So again, my name is Robert Corbett. I'm one of the division's Blue Crab leads based out of the Elizabeth City office. Today I have with me McLean Seward. He's the other Blue Crab lead based out of the Wilmington office. Today, we'll be discussing Amendment 3, Adaptive Management Options, and the division's preliminary recommendations for management changes in the blue crab fishery. Following this presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions before you vote on advisory committee recommendations. And just to be clear, the recommendations we are discussing today are indeed preliminary. These recommendations may change based on the input we receive from tonight and tomorrow. Today's presentation will begin with a recap of our current timeline. Following this, we'll look at trends we've observed in the blue crab stock and revisit the adaptive management framework as outlined in Amendment 3 to the Blue Crab Fisheries Management Plan. We'll then transition into a discussion of potential management strategies, examining the pros and cons of each before concluding this presentation with the division's preliminary recommendation. Once completed, we will be glad to take any questions, and we would appreciate your input before you vote on advisory committee recommendations. To recap, a benchmark stock assessment was completed in 2018 and determined the blue crab stock was overfished and overfishing was occurring. Amendment 3 to the blue crab FMP was developed and adopted in response to the stock assessment results. At the May 2024 MFC business meeting, DMF presented the results of the 2023 stock assessment update, terminal year 2022. And we highlighted concerns with the assessment's results and the diagnostics. The primary concern was the drastic change in reference points between the benchmark and the update. Due to this and other issues identified by peer reviewers, the 2023 update will not be used for management purposes or to inform the needed harvest reduction. We then continued our presentation discussing ongoing declining trends in our dependent and independent monitoring before outlining our plan to implement management changes through the Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework. In September, the division conducted outreach meetings with the Northern, the Southern, and the Shellfish Crustacean MFC advisory committees. Although public attendance was small, the meetings provided solid input from crabbers on current stock conditions and thoughts on how to pursue the management going forward. After the AC meetings, leads continued outreach and analysis and began drafting the revision to Amendment 3. At the August and November MFC business meetings, the division updated the commission on our progress. Today, we will be presenting the draft revision and providing the division's preliminary recommendations. After today, the division may reevaluate the preliminary recommendations before bringing the final revision to the MFC in May for selection of management measures. Now, just like Jesse said, currently we are still scheduled for May. However, since we were pushed off the schedule from February to give this presentation, it's likely that the final vote may be in August. So before we get into the current stock trends, I want to make a few notes about the benchmark stock assessment, the updated assessment, and why we aren't using the updated assessment to inform harvest reductions. These figures show the estimated spawners, recruits, and fishing mortality from the benchmark stock assessment and the update. The benchmark is shown in orange and the update is in blue. In all cases, trends from the benchmark and the update match extremely well. Spawners and recruits are declining and fishing mortality remains high. This means the benchmark and the update are telling us the same thing, and that is the stock has continued to decline. The key difference between the benchmark and the update is the drastic change in reference points. The figure on the top shows the estimated spawners and the fishing mortality from the benchmark stock assessment. The reference points are illustrated by the dashed and dotted lines. The threshold reference points is what we use to determine if the stock is overfished and if overfishing is occurring. As you can see, in 2016, the stock was considered overfished and overfishing was occurring, but not by much. And it hadn't been occurring throughout the entire time series. The figures on the bottom show the estimated spawners and fishing mortality from the updated stock assessment. On these figures, the threshold reference points is illustrated by the solid black line. Again, this is what we use to determine if the stock is overfished and if overfishing is occurring. As you can see, the reference points changed drastically from the benchmark to the update, to the point where the stock status would be much worse than what was indicated by the benchmark stock assessment, and the results suggested the stock was always overfished and overfishing was always occurring. For these reasons, among others, and as peer reviewers recommended, the division agrees the stock assessment update should not be used to inform harvest reductions. So, in summary, the benchmark stock assessment was completed in 2018 and determined the stock was overfished and overfishing was occurring as of 2016. In 2023, the assessment was updated with data through 2022. Although the trends from the update match closely to those of the benchmark, the resulting reference points exhibited significant and unexpected shifts. The reference points changed to the extent where the stock status would be much worse compared to those of the benchmark, to the point where the stock would have been overfished and overfishing would have been occurring throughout the entire time series. To note, if the updated stock assessment was used to inform harvest reductions of at least 45% would be statutorily required, this meeting the threshold. The target would be 56%. Due to this magnitude and change in reference points and the external peer review of the assessment update, it was completed in late December of 2023. Reviewers identified concerns with the model specifications and results and strongly recommended resolving the issues before basing any management decisions on the assessment update alone. Suggestions provided by the reviewers can only be incorporated with a new benchmark stock assessment. Given the concerns identified by DMF and the external reviewers of the 2023 stock assessment update, will not be used to inform harvest reductions. However, even though we are not using the update, it does not mean that the data that went into it is invalid. The data is still informative. So even though the updated stock assessment is not being used to inform harvest reductions, the update still provides information about the ongoing trends we're observing. These figures show data through 2022, the terminal year of the assessment, and date all the way back to 1995. The top figure in black illustrates the estimated number of recruits or juvenile crabs in the stock, and the bottom figure in blue illustrates the estimated number of spawning females in the stock. As you can see, both figures clearly indicate steady declines, with the decline in spawners closely following the decline in recruits. Both show the lowest estimates being in the later part of the time series, year 2021 and 2022. These same declining trends in recruits and spawner abundance are also captured in our independent sampling. Looking into some of our independent sampling, these figures show abundance for both male and female blue crabs from our Program 195 Pamlico Sound trawl survey. The figure on the left shows recruit abundance, with the June survey shown on the top and the September survey shown on the bottom. The same applies for the figures on the right side of the screen, but for adult crabs. We consider adult crabs with a carapace width of 5 inches or larger and recruits anything less than 5 inches. Please note that the scale of the y-axis is different from the graphs on the right side of the screen versus those on the left. Although there are some minor spikes through the time series, males and females of both life stages show continued declines or continued low abundance through 2022, with some of the lowest values in the time series in recent years, which is indicative of a low overall population. Moving on, the overall decline in recruitment is further illustrated in these figures, which shows both our males and female recruits from our Program 120 juvenile trawl survey. Again, we are considering recruits any crab less than 5 inches. Male recruits are on the top, female recruits are on the bottom. Both male and female recruits have seen steady declines through the time series, with the last few years being the lowest ever on record. Decline in recruits and spawner abundance estimated from the updated stock assessment are not only reflective in our fishery independent sampling, but are also reflective in commercial landings. These figures show the commercial landings of all blue crabs from 1994 through 2023. Landings of all blue crabs have declined since the record high of 67 million pounds back in 96. In 2022, the harvest level dropped to the lowest ever on the time series, only 9.5 million pounds. Also shown on this figure are dates of the important fishery management changes since the adoption of the original FMP back in 1998. It is important to note that until the adoption of Amendment 2 revision and Amendment 3, there had been no management that would directly limit harvest to any significant extent, yet landings have continued to decline. In addition to declining harvest levels, we see similar declines in participation and in number of trips. The bars here represent the number of participants, which corresponds to the axis on the left. The orange line represents the number of blue crab trips, which corresponds to the axis on the right. Similar to the previous figure, dates for all important fisheries management changes since the adoption of the original FMP back in 1998 through the adoption of Amendment 3 in 2020 are indicated. In 2023, crabbers had less than 1/4 of the number of participants we did back in 96, 97. And as for the number of trips, in 2023, North Carolina crabbers made slightly more than 1/5 of the number of trips that we did in 98. These figures show the annual hard crab landings on the left axis and the number of trips on the right axis. Since 1994, landings have declined in a similar pattern to the number of trips landing blue crab. Now, we recognize and are well aware that factors other than the struggling stock can lead to decreased landings, decreased trips, and fewer participants. But the fact is that we are also seeing this while we are seeing an all-time low in recruitment levels, which is being observed in our independent surveys, which in combination provides strong evidence that these landings declines are indicative of a low population. I'd also like to point out that the declines that we've seen in North Carolina blue crab stock are not unique. Other states along the Atlantic coast have observed similar declines. In January of 2023, South Carolina Department of Natural Resources released a status report on the South Carolina blue crab fishery. The report concluded that South Carolina blue crab stock has been in decline for nearly 2 decades and provided recommendations to prevent overharvesting, gradually reducing fishing pressure, prevent overexploitation, and strengthen enforcement capabilities. Shown here is the figure from the South Carolina report illustrating the coast-wide commercial landing declines. Likewise, reports from the Chesapeake Bay indicate that although blue crab stock is not depleted and overfishing is not occurring, juvenile abundance remains low. Precautionary management focused on protecting mature females and juveniles has been recommended to the Chesapeake Bay stock, and a benchmark stock assessment has begun to better understand the population. Adaptive management options discussed today intend to counteract the long-term declining trends we've observed in our independent programs, as well as the data collected from commercial landings. The Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework is prescriptive in how it can be used and the steps that must be taken. There are 2 key points I want to highlight. First, since we do not have a updated stock assessment that we can use to inform harvest reductions, but all the available information suggests Amendment 3 management is not working as intended and is not projected to meet sustainability requirements. The Adaptive Management Framework allows for reevaluation and implementation of revised and/or new management. Second, it's important to note that since management changes would be implemented through the Adaptive Management Framework adopted through Amendment 3, any action the MFC pursues must be quantifiable. As a reminder, the benchmark stock assessment projections indicated a minimum harvest reduction of 0.4% was needed to end overfishing, and a minimum harvest reduction of 2.2% was needed to achieve sustainable harvest and rebuild the blue crab spawning stock within 10 years of the date of adoption, with a 50% probability of success, meeting the statutory requirement. Management adopted in Amendment 3 was estimated to reduce harvest by 2.4% with only a 50% probability of success. However, projections indicated from that same benchmark stock assessment, a 19.8% harvest reduction was needed to meet the female spawner abundance target with a 100% probability of success. Today, we're about halfway through that statutorily required rebuilding period with very little indication Amendment 3 management will meet rebuilding targets. Therefore, adaptive management will be used to implement options that rebuild the stock closer to the spawner abundance target and have a probability of success closer to 100%. All options examined are estimated to result in a greater than 10% harvest reduction, and the division recommends options with a greater than 15% chance harvest reduction is to increase the probability of success. So the potential management strategies to counteract declining trends, which can be implemented through Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework, include size limit changes, prohibit crab trawling, season closures, and trip limits. Harvest reductions for each of these managements are quantifiable, so they meet the requirements of Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework. We'll discuss the pros and the cons of each of these options, providing the rationale for the division's preliminary recommendations. But before we get into these options, other management strategies suggested by stakeholders include pot limits, time limits, and increased regulations on shedding operations. Due to the limited data on true effort and data that accurately characterizes shedding operations, harvest reductions from these options are not quantifiable, so they are not explored through the adaptive management. These options may be explored further in the next review of the Blue Crab FMP, which is currently set to occur in 2026. Another topic we've heard constantly from stakeholders is that predation by blue catfish and other species has led to the decline in the blue crab population. Stakeholders have suggested that these predation be considered in the management of the blue crabs and other species. Currently, we do not have the data needed to address these type of ecosystem-based management, but I am pleased to announce that several projects are underway to better understand the effects of predation on the blue crab stock. And I'll also note that currently we do not have the data necessary to quantify the recreational blue crab harvest, but it's generally assumed that it's small. Currently, the recreational fishery is held to the same restrictions as the commercial fishery, in addition to a limit of 50 crabs per person, 100 crabs per vessel per day. Any new management will also be applied to the recreational fishery. All right, so the first option we'll discuss today is size limit changes. Currently, the minimum size limit for blue crab harvest is 5-inch carapace width statewide. For this management strategy, we have two options. We could increase the minimum size limit, or we can implement a maximum size limit. As for a minimum size limit, harvest reductions may not be met by increasing the minimum size limit, as undersized crabs quickly grow to legal size and become susceptible to harvest. Crabbers will face higher labor costs due to increased culling efforts, or crabbers may need to invest in larger cull rings. Law enforcement will require updated measuring tools to be manufactured, verified, and distributed, which could delay enforcement if regulations are implemented quickly. Regional stock differences could lead to uneven harvest reductions, market price fluctuations, and economic uncertainty for crabbers. Additionally, maximum size limits alone will have minimal impact on reducing the harvest and would need to be combined with other measures such as increasing the minimum size limit, year restrictions, and/or season closures. This strategy is likely to be unpopular with crabbers, as larger crabs are often your most valuable. Since cull ring changes are unlikely to exclude larger crabs, crabbers will be burdened with the increased effort and time required to cull or catch, as oversized crabs will need to be identified and released. This strategy could be particularly burdensome during periods of high catch volume if the catch includes crabs from many size classes. So for these reasons, options for size limits changes were not developed. The next option we'll discuss is to prohibit crab trawling. This topic we heard a lot of concern about from stakeholders, primarily because the conflicts between crab trawlers and crab potters, and because crab trawls primarily harvest female crabs. Overall, blue crab harvest from crab trawls contributes minimally to the overall harvest, generally accounting for less than 1%. This figure shows the blue crab harvest by crab trawls from 2019 to 2023 by month, with each year color-coded. As you can see, most crabs are harvested from December through April, and harvest is highly variable from year to year. Due to the location and the time of the year crabs trawls operate, most of the crab harvested by crab trawls are females of lower market value. Lastly, another issue is the continuing conflicts between the trawlers and the potters over fishing locations. But when discussing crab trawling, even at its peak, trawling made up very little of the overall harvest of blue crabs. For reference, even if trawling was prohibited in 2023, it is estimated that we would have seen only a 0.6% reduction in harvest. While trawls don't harvest a lot of crabs, this portion of the fishery harvests mostly females during biologically important times of the year prior to spawning for late fall, winter months. For example, of the 87,812 pounds harvested from trawls in 2023, we estimate roughly 70,000 of those pounds were females overwintering in the mud, preparing to sponge out in the spring. Limiting harvest from this year might have important stock benefits by protecting females and promoting recruitment. And it's important to note that currently there are very few crabbers participating in the crab trawl fishery. However, any further growth in this industry may be detrimental to the crab stock and recruitment. Pros for this management option include being easily enforceable and providing protection for female crabs, and it would alleviate conflicts between potters and trawlers. The cons of this option include the fact that this will only affect trawlers and the management provides very little overall harvest reduction. Next, let's discuss extending the current season closures. Current regulations have season closures from January 1st to January 31st for areas above the Highway 58 bridge, and a closure from March 1st through March 15th for areas south of the Highway 58 bridge. The options in this table show the estimated harvest reductions if the existing closures were extended and implemented statewide. Since effort can be increased during open periods to offset the losses of the closed season, it's best to have the season closures at a minimum of 2 weeks, but preferably longer. These options show the estimated harvest reductions compared to landings in 2023 and the average annual landings from 2019 to 2023. Please note that for illustrative purposes, this table has been color formatted to better display the reduction levels. The darker the green, the higher the estimated reduction. So first, let's take a closer look at the early season closures. Highlighted here indicates the estimated harvest reduction if we would observe if the closure were to be extended statewide to include all of January and February, from January 1st through the middle of March, and from January 1st through the end of March. Even if we were to went to the extreme end, that January through the end of March closure, we would only expect a very minimum harvest reduction. This option would need to be combined with other measures to meet the level of harvest reduction needed. A significant concern that we've heard from the public is limiting the extent of any season closure to not affect peeler season due to the profitability of the fishery. Extending the season closure past March would indeed affect peeler season. So for that reason, we did not develop any season closure options that exceeded the end of March. Listed here are some of the pros and the cons for extending the season closure in the early part of the year, and I'll just touch on a few for time's sake. Pros, protection provided to crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning season, and season closures are easily enforceable. However, extending the season closures early in the year has some drawbacks, the most of which is the fact that season closures provide no opportunities for crabbers to work, and predicted reductions may be less than expected due to recruitment once the fishery reopens. Now, if we were to extend the season closures back into December, into November, and even back into October, we start to see the estimated harvest reductions increase drastically. Late season closures tend to be more effective at achieving harvest reductions because there's less opportunity for recruitment and the blue crab fishery. More crabs are being harvested later in the year than in the beginning. However, even though extending the closure period back and continuing through March results in a higher estimated harvest reduction, unless the closure is extended into at least November, the estimated harvest reduction is still low. Again, we're talking about a potential 5-month closure. Listed here are the pros and the cons, and again, I'll just touch on a few. Pros, Again, protection provided to crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning season, and it's easily enforceable. However, extending the season closures late in the year has some major drawbacks, the most of which is the fact that season closures provide no opportunity for crabbers to work, and predicted reductions may be less than expected due to recruitment once the fishery reopens. So moving on to our last management strategy, trip limits. Maryland and Virginia each manage blue crab harvest with some form of trip limit in combination with other measures. Trip limits, unlike complete season closures, allows opportunities for crabbers to continue fishing and allowing for some harvest. Trip limits are adaptable and can be implemented seasonally or incrementally, accounting for market conditions and stock characteristics to evenly distribute harvest reductions across the state. Displayed here is a figure that indicates the average number of bushels being landed per trip by month from 2019 to 2023. Please note that the table has been color formatted by row to better display the percentages. When viewing this figure, we can clearly see that most commercial trips landing hard blue crabs land between 1 and 15 bushels throughout the year. However, we can also see that in the later months, we start to see a large increase in the number of trips landing above 30 bushels per trip. This happens relatively quickly without a gradual transition. And we'll touch on this topic as the presentation continues. So to begin examining trip limits, let's first discuss the possibility of implementing a year-round trip limit. This table represents the estimated harvest reduction at any given bushel limit for each month. For illustrative purposes, this chart has been color formatted by column to easily show the estimated reduction. The darker the red, the higher the reduction. But before we get into the year-round bushel limit option, let's first go over this table a little bit. Again, this table represents the average percent harvest reduction we would have seen from a bushel limit if it was implemented from 2016 to 2023. The column to the left displays the months, and the rows highlighted here shows the bushel limit options. So if we were to investigate a 15 bushel limit in the month of October, we estimate we would receive a reduction of 6%. Now, please note that these reductions assume there is no change in effort. And again, I would like to remind you that this chart is color formatted by column. So the 6% here is darker than the 9.6% here. And this is due to the 6% being one of the largest reductions that we would see from the 15 bushel limit column. So back to the options. A year-round trip limit for all hard crabs of 15 bushels would result in an estimated harvest reduction of 31.9%. This would be option 1B in your decision document. For reference, a bushel limit of 20 bushels per trip would be estimated 22.6% reduction, and 10 would be a 45.6% reduction. Options 1A and 1C in your decision document. Please note that these estimates assume effort will stay the same. If effort increases during periods of high demand, harvest reductions will likely not be realized. Moving on to option 2, we've constantly heard from stakeholders about the markets and how the markets at certain times of the year regulate harvest due to supply and demand. Several times we heard from crabbers emphasize that any management should not restrict harvest during the summer months, your June and August, likely because many North Carolina crabbers make the majority of their profits during this time. Option 2 considers this input by implementing a trip limit during biologically important periods for the blue crab life history and outside the June and August timeframe. So if we were to implement a 15 bushel limit for all hard crabs, but this time only instituted from September to December, we estimate the harvest reduction would be 16.4%, option 2B in your decision document. Although this reduction is much lower than the previous option, which was 31.9%, roughly half, this reduction occurs in a third of the time period and still estimated to be greater than 15% reduction. However, again, if effort changes, which it likely will, this estimated harvest reduction is unlikely to be met in times of high demand and availability. Option 3 is a combination approach between options 2 bushel limit and a season closure to increase the estimated harvest reduction. We heard a lot of comments from crabbers about the management during the early part of the year, mainly that effort is extremely low during these times, which we have trip ticket data supporting that, and supply is low. But the one thing to note is that during these winter months, prices for blue crabs soar, primarily due to the closures in other crab producing states. Options implementing trip limits early in the season would be less intrusive to the majority of crabbers due to the lack of trips during this time. Also, protecting crabs, primarily the females that made it through the winter months during the time of the year just before they spawn, will help promote increased recruitment. So this option 3B in your decision document, looks at a 15 bushel limit from September to November and then extend the season statewide closure from December through March. This option would result in an estimated harvest reduction of 22.3%, which is much closer to the option 1 reduction. So the primary function of these options would be to limit catch, with the assumption that crabbers will change fishing practices not to exceed the limit. Pros for all hard crab bushel limits is that reduced harvest could result in more crabs being able to reproduce because of protections provided during and prior to the mating and spawning seasons. Regulations are simple and easily enforceable while distributing the reductions evenly throughout the state. But while trip limits of all hard crabs offer a straightforward approach to management of blue crab harvest, there are drawbacks. One concern is that crabbers driven by high demand and prices may increase fishing trips and fishing effort beyond pre-regulation levels to meet the demand, despite the trip limit. This could lead to a steady or increased pressure on the crab population, even if the daily limits are adhered to. For example, if I'm a crabber that normally lands 20 bushels every other day and a bushel limit of 10 was instituted, I may just increase my trips and start fishing every day, collecting my 10 bushels, which will result in no reduction at all. I still fish the same number of pots, I just fish half of my pots one day and the other half the next. Because of this, the estimated harvest reduction for these options may be inflated to the change in effort during times of high demand and high volume, your summer and fall. Furthermore, crabbers may fish pots less frequently, holding onto their catch in unfished pots to avoid exceeding the daily trip limit, constantly fishing more gear than necessary. Trip limits will also increase the time to sort and cull the catch and lead to discarding of smaller, legal sized, and lower valued crabs, as crabbers prioritize keeping the largest crabs to maximize the value of their catch within the limit. Now, to be clear, these options are limitless, but for time's sake, I will save that discussion. Now that I've displayed our thought process working through the numerous outcomes of limitless combinations, I would now like to dive into the division's preliminary recommendation. However, before I can do so, we have one more element that we have not yet discussed, and that's sex-specific management. See, crabs possess an amazing attribute, which is the ability for harvesters to easily differentiate crabs based on sex. And unlike most fish species that we manage, we can target management aimed at conserving crabs based on their sex. This table shows the estimated harvest reduction from mature females only trip limits by month. Again, for illustrated purposes, this chart has been color-coded by column to easily show the estimated levels of reduction. This table is very similar to the one that we looked at the previously due to the majority of the reductions taking place in the fall months where primarily females are targeted. In addition, these females, which are usually your lesser valued market category, are getting harvested at higher rates at times of the year when their market value is even less. Most crabs during these later months are being sold in bulk, sold as culls, mix, and straights. So if we were to take our last option, option 3, and apply it to mature females only, lowering the bushel limit to 10 bushels instead of 15 from September to December, and prohibit harvest on mature females only from January through May, we estimate that this would result in a 17.1% harvest reduction, option 7 in your decision document. Unlike the first 3 options that we spoke about today, the all hard crab bushel limits, harvest reductions estimates from this option may be low. because of how females are targeted during the times of the year. At the end of the year, crabs, particularly females, become more available due to their location and mobility. When the water cools, males and female crabs separate. Females usually prefer saltier environments near inlets and stay relatively active and mobile. Male crabs become more lethargic as to not waste energy and stay in less saltier waters, usually your rivers. Crabbers that target males leave their pots in place, less pots than they usually fish in the summer, and usually fish less often, every 3 to 5 days, instead of every day or every other day, but just before they finally pick up their pots due to the season closure. Crabbers that target females tend to fish their pots more often, needing to constantly move their pots following the cast of females as they move. Crabbers targeting females during these times are not making nearly the profit margins they were in the summer months due to being mostly sold as culls, straights, or mixed. And they rely mainly on quantity to make it worth their effort. If we were to implement a mature female bushel limit for these later months, it is likely effort may decline as not enough female crabs can be landed to make fishing profitable, leaving more females available for next year's spawn. This option can be further modified to extend the 10 bushel limit from June to December. This option limits mature female harvest throughout the year rather than allowing for a complete open harvest during the summer, which should increase the abundance of spawning females. This option, option 8, is the division's preliminary recommendation. This option is a mature female 10 bushel limit per trip from June to December, before switching to a 0 harvest of mature females only from January through May. This option is estimated to result in a 21.7% harvest reduction. Again, we are not using the updated stock assessment to inform harvest reductions because of the concerns raised by the division's external peer reviewers. However, if we were to use the updated stock assessment, we would be statutorily required to implement a reduction of no less than 45%. The division's preliminary recommendation is less than half of that, what would have been required. We'll also note that this option would be applied to the recreational fishery as well. So recreational crabbers would not be able to harvest mature female crabs from January through May. To reiterate, the intent of the division's preliminary recommendation is to promote blue crab recruitment and increase abundance, targeting management towards the protection of mature females. Mature females have a lower market value, and mature females are essential for the future of the blue crab stock. The blue crab FMP is currently scheduled to review in 2026, and if adopted at the time, we will reevaluate the effectiveness of this management. Our approach is guided by the adaptive management framework, emphasizing clear, quantifiable, and uncomplicated management. This two-step option presented here exemplifies this straightforward approach, attempting to keep regulations simple. So the pros and the cons for this option. Pros: implemented in times of life history importance, providing protection to mature female crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning seasons. And unlike all hard crab bushel limits, if adopted, this option is likely to have crabbers fish all of their active gear instead of leaving it out there like holding tanks, collecting the males and releasing the females once the female limit is met. This option would also likely result in the end of crab trawling due to most of the trawls catch being female in the late and early times of the year. This option would be implemented in times of high harvest and low market value and will not interrupt peeler season as mature females do not shed. In addition, a lot of literature points out the first brood spring females being larger and more fecund. Larvae spawned in the spring show increased growth and development and lower mortality due to lower water temperatures and higher phytoplankton concentrates. Protecting blue crab females en route to overwintering and allowing them to spawn in the spring could result in increase in recruitment and crab abundance. The cons. This option does have the potential to skew the blue crab's natural sex ratio. However, due to the way that we're currently over-harvesting females later on in the year, we may have been doing this for a long time. In addition, this option will unevenly distribute the reductions throughout the state. Crabbers in higher salinity areas, primarily those on the eastern side of the Pamlico Sound and the southern part of the state, will be more heavily impacted than crabbers in the western Albemarle Sound and the western side of the Pamlico Sound. So in conclusion, all available data indicates that the blue crab stock is not recovering as projected. While harvest reductions have occurred, these are likely the result of continued declines in the blue crab stock, not the result of management action. Today, we are nearly halfway through the statutorily required Amendment 3 rebuilding period with little indication the stock recovery will be successful. Additional management should reduce harvest above the statutory required minimum to increase the probability of the stock recovery, even when variability in harvest is high. Lastly, to rebuild the female spawner abundance and promote recruitment, the division's preliminary recommendation focuses on implementing protection measures for mature females only. This approach is designed to minimize the impact on crabbers by focusing on the protection of mature female crabs, which are generally your less valued sex economically, but are vital to the recruitment and the future of the blue crab stock. This direction aims to achieve a sustainable balance between conservation and the needs of the industry. I would like to thank you for your time and attention as I've outlined this complex topic in our thought process. As directed by the Marine Fisheries Commission, we've explored numerous management options while integrating significant stakeholder input. We recognize the blue crab fishery as being vital to North Carolina's economy and fisheries, and any future management requires careful consideration. We believe our preliminary recommendation strikes a balance between protecting the blue crab stock through strategically timed harvest limitations and incorporating input we receive from the crabbing community on how they would like to see the fishery managed. This approach aims to rebuild the declining stock while considering the concerns of those who rely on it. And as a reminder, after this meeting, the division will review your input and preferred management and may revise our preliminary recommendations if needed. The final vote, along with your recommendations, will be brought back to the MFC at the upcoming May meeting for final vote, possibly the August meeting. And at this time, we will gladly take any questions before you vote on advisory committee recommendations.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate the presentation, thoroughness of the work that you guys have done on it. Jesse, is it okay? Can we take a 5-minute break and then come back and do public comment?
Yes, sir, that's
And then
perfectly
Then
fine.
we'll have questions and,
Yeah, I think those are comment before we vote.
yeah, that's what I'm hoping we can do. Okay, we're gonna take a 5-minute break and then we'll reconvene. We'll reconvene with public comment. I have 7 folks here on the list that have indicated they will. We're gonna go against them, and we're gonna start with public comment. So we had 7 people on the list that had signed in that said they wish to speak, and so we're just gonna go in the order that they signed in. In order to allow us to move through the meeting quickly, each speaker is gonna be limited to 3 minutes. And Jesse's got this, and so we don't have to interrupt people. The color on the screen is gonna stay green until you hit about 2.5 minutes, and then it'll change to yellow. And then when you hit 3 minutes, it'll change to red. If you go to 3.5, it's gonna start flashing. If it gets to 4, I don't know what. So first on the list is Lauren. Is it Birch? Okay.
And look, I'm nervous about, I don't know if what I read of yours, but I've read some of your research and I'm not a biologist, so just. All right. Good evening. I sent a document to you guys. This was also presented to the Northern Advisory Committee. And tomorrow I hope to discuss even more. We have started conversations already at the Blue Crab Advisory meeting. Tonight I ask that you pass 2 motions. The first is to pay your support to move this vote to August. It was removed because of the abbreviated package in March as they were sitting. But not only does moving this, it gives public time to comment, and it also just gives a little bit of respect for the industry participants and not moving this vote to the busiest month of the year. I think it's a great step in the right direction of building trust between the 2 parties. The second is that no new management options be implemented until we can see a quantifiable indicator of the already in place measurements that we've had in Amendment 3. You showed a graph that showed when Amendment 3 was started that with a 5.9% reduction with a 90% probability. Due to COVID-19 and the unprecedented market demands, we saw a decrease in catch by around 50% for 3 years, with females becoming mature within 12 to 18 months and a 3-year reduction. By that logic, we should have seen a spike in those abundance, and this is cause and effect and not correlation. If anything, there's a correlation between lack of crabbers and stock. I don't believe that, but you know what I mean, if you wanted to go with correlation rather than causation. In that package, I reference a study by Dr. Cole that actually looked at the biomass index based on business as usual, as opposed to the reduced crabbing efforts seen in the COVID-19, I think there's 3 years. And what they found is that the biomass index rebounded significantly because of the low lifespan. However, our models don't show that. There's a reason. I don't know why they're flawed, but there's something going on that's flawed. I'm not going to try to fix it today. I think that the only way we're going to fix it is having crabbers from different areas all be involved in the gathering the data, the analytics of data, and then the conclusions found. Tonight, there was a few instances where you made statements that were if you said it to a crabber, they laughed because we crab every day. I make my husband take Sunday off because I'm gonna have a day, but he don't crab half of our stuff. We're not going to be able to crab 800 pots because of the physical demands on this. I see you have about 3 indicators: samplings, landings, and participants. Your samplings, we just talked about that. Your model shows a 90% stock reduction, and that's unrealistic. We're not seeing that on the water. Again, your fishing efforts should show a spike because of that reduction. You keep saying you have a lot of ways to reduce harvest, but we don't see the correlation between a reduced harvest and a rebounded crab stock. There should be a correlation there. Landings and participants go hand in hand. If you look at page 11 in the document, it shows the landings per trip are pretty much flat. Market participants, this is the hard salt. It's labor intensive, it's early rising, physically demanding, and some would say stinky, but we say it smells like money. Industries all over that are labor intensive have lost participants. 88% of the labor force growth since 2019 has been migrant workers. Our younger generations are not going to bank on this industry without a clear. Oh, no problem. I'll be back.
Thank you. So next speaker is Selby Lewis.
All right, so I got a couple things I want to bring up. First off, I'm 22 years old. My dad's commercial fished for 40 years. If you asked me, would I do this as a job in my life? I'd laugh at you because I've watched my whole life as this is played on. They don't listen to commercial fishermen. They get walked on, and now it's affecting their livelihood. I honestly believe in 10 more years, you wouldn't be able to make a living fishing at the rate it's going. I think things need to be looked in other than the commercial fishing. I think environment's changing. I think that there's runoff from all this building and development. There's prop wash. All these factors are contributing. I mean, every species we have in the state has basically seen a decline. And I don't think that's just because of fishing. Some of them are already heavily regulated, but are still declining. So I think other things need to be looked at. I get there's probably not the resources there now, but maybe y'all can look into trying to get the resources. I'm sure y'all already have for some of it, but I mean, it's hurting people's livelihood. Another thing is a few years ago, y'all passed something and it was a 2.2% reduction. And it had a 50% chance of a success. Well, if I was a crabber and the science said something needed to happen, I wouldn't want to flip a coin and say, and if this lands on heads, in 10 years, I'm going to have a job. If it lands on tails, there's not going to be enough crabs to make a living. So if we're seeing a 50% chance of something working, why are we doing that? We've seen the same thing on the federal level with grouper, and we finally got them to listen. Like, you can't take steps to just try to get by, and then in the end, we're going to end up with situations like this where drastic cuts have to be taken. Another thing is, if y'all do what I'm sure y'all probably will and do the female thing, I would do it like based on region, because some crabbers are in areas with inlets. I mean, they're going to be out of business. You can't ask someone to move their whole operation just because, you can't keep females, where other crabbers will be fine because they catch mostly males. I mean, it has to be equal, and for it to be equal, it has to be based on area, I feel like. But anyways, that's all I got.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Appreciate the comments. Next on the list is Hayden Berry.
Yes, sir. If the board will allow it, I would like my mom to take my time. She would represent my points a whole lot better.
Sure.
If y'all would accept it, I would thank you.
So formal. Well, we respect the board. So back what I was saying is that why are we going to invest in this? What I think the best way, and I understand that everyone's goals should be the same. It should be a healthy ecosystem. What you have here is you have knowledge from people. So why don't we work to find something that's going to maybe fix the water quality, is actually going to save the stock, instead of spending so much time on here's how we can reduce catch without the expected goals. I don't know. I mean, water quality has been a big thing. I know that Duke has research on how they've been able to take I'm going to completely butcher this word, psilocybins. You can look it up. We have shutter systems. Maybe we can research and work on that. Find something that's actually going to fix it, because if it was overfishing reasons, we wouldn't have it. A lot of people don't think about this, but the small crabs come into our pots and they eat. And sometimes we don't catch anything because there's just small crabs and they go right back out. And that's a feed source. Again, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a scientist, but I do think that in order for this to work, the crabbers have got to get off the dock. They've got to talk to you guys, and we have to be involved again in the whole process. We have to feel seen, and it has to make sense, because this doesn't make sense. You say that it's on that about the crab moving the bushel. You catch what's in the water. I'm not gonna catch females no matter how I move my pots in the create that sound because we catch males. You have to have your underlying basic assumptions correct for you to build your models on. And I hope that this is gonna be the first step for industry. You got our attention, okay? You got our attention. So with a movement forward, don't do anything. We've got Amendment 4 coming up in 2016. We can all work together. We can find correct sampling and work with scientists. We can work with people throughout the coast to deal with those differentiations and find what goes on. Again, another thing, you're saying something about the clutches. Clutches that are held over winter have a less viability. So that beginning clutch spawn doesn't have that great of viability. It's more after they mate. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Burge. Next on the list will be Sam Romano.
Hey, everybody, my name's Sam Romano. I'm a commercial fisherman, co-owner of Seaview Crab Company, also a shellfish farmer. I'm representing crabbers, picking houses, a really broad industry that this is going to have a lot of effect on. It's ironic that I've just came back from our shellfish garden and I've been dumping out juvenile crabs out of all of our gear, from the size of a eraser head to any other size. And what I see is that's data, and when I saw this this stock assessment that didn't pass peer review, immediately I would think, with a fisheries management plan, instead of going directly into rulemaking, that to me as a scientist would cause me to retract and say, man, there's something missing here. And we can take action in a different sort of way rather than creating a huge tumultuous event in the industry and giving some of these guys heart attacks back here. Why not try to figure out a way that we can get better data? I know you guys have your own set of data and you feel confident about it. I'm not trying to push down anybody's data, but there has to be some outreach to some of these crabbers, and where they're not seeing it. You see it in the public comment, and it affects their lives, and they're not feeling heard. The word adaptive management, when I was on the Fisheries Commission, I always was very leery of, because it seemed to me like, in some ways, as a business person, you want to make quick decisions and you want to be able to not get bogged down with a lot of talking. But when it comes to, scientific procedure, I think that's a really dangerous thing. And I worry a lot with adaptive management that there is no backwards adaptive management. So we're singling in on some pieces of data that may be worrying, and we're choosing to go forward. Well, we have some data within our fisheries that are actually positive, but there's no action on using adaptive management to go backward to kind of say, well, let's give some back. And I think that would be something that would be an olive branch to the industry, but we're just really not seeing that. As far as data collection, we're all crabbers back here. A lot of these guys, we see the same things, but we see a lot of different things as well. And we work our deer a lot differently than we did when we started 20 some years ago, my brother and I. And I know that the division's methodologies, they have to be very strict and stringent, but I think we need to start looking at different ways to collect this data. A lot of fishermen have brought up, problems with the trawl surveys, and I have a problem with this myself. I'd like to see some more surveying crabbers, verbal surveys, because that's data as well. I would like to see some different methods in terms of maybe baiting peeler pots. You'd see totally different things. And we've been back and forth with biologists forever on these topics. This is a long standing thing. So I think that it's time for us to go backwards and really start looking at the science and be curious of some different things that we can do to learn more instead of making rules. Thank you.
Taylor Barefoot.
Taylor Barefoot. I started in the fishing industry when I was 16 years old. I'm 32 now. This industry's given me everything I've ever wanted. Own a house, provide for my family, wife and 2 kids. And I'm going to tell you right now, what you're doing to our industry right now is wrong. The Division of Marine Fisheries is a lost dog. And I don't think y'all have a clue what you're really even going off of. A lot of time, y'all are just going off of what other people want, agenda, conservation groups like the CCA and other places like that. And I just, man, it aggravates me so bad to come to these meetings and y'all stare at me thinking, you know, you should say something back to me, and you can't even say nothing to you, because then you go like, well, if you look back in this article here, your data is for people like y'all, and you yourself, when you were doing that, you're like in a college class going to like other people that really understand that. You know, not everybody's been to those colleges and understand that. And I understand a lot of it, but some of it you lose it. And I think a lot of times you should really kind of like Sam was talking about, work with the fishermen a lot better. I full-time fish all the time. I see sometimes they come down to the fish house and measure fish. Not one time in probably the past 4 years have y'all come down Luke Ingraham's place and measured a crab. You get places like UNCW to measure crabs in places. Why are they doing the surveys? Division of Marine Fisheries should be measuring the crabs at these places, not UNCW and not colleges, because those colleges are not, well, really it's getting off topic. But anyways, I really think the Division of Marine Fisheries needs a complete overhaul and needs to start over again, because I think y'all are just really flat out a corrupt organization.
Thank you, Mr. Barefoot. Joe Romano.
I wish I could follow up with a little more conversational collaboration, but I feel pretty well in the same regards as all that spoke here tonight. I'm here today as a commercial crabber and a co-owner of Seaview Crab Company. We're here because the Division of Marine Fisheries is proposing absurd restrictions on our industry. Restrictions based on flawed science, without economic consideration, without meaningful conversations with the people whose livelihoods will be destroyed by these policies. I was the Blue Crab chairman on the last Fisheries Management Committee. I was not contacted. I've also owned Seaview Crab Company. I buy crabs, I catch crabs. We're not involved. Let's be clear, the DMF has not in any meaningful way reached out to commercial crabbers, picking houses, seafood markets, crab houses, or any other business that depends on North Carolina blue crabs to validate their science or assess the economic impact of their decisions. And yet you're being told that more restrictions, trip limits, seasonal closures, and outright bans are necessary based on an outdated traffic light system that ignores the natural cycles of blue crab populations, rising predator populations, habitat destruction, and water quality issues. DMF's own external reviewers rejected the 2023 stock assessment as flawed and remarked that no new rules should be made based on this flawed science. This is a major red flag. Here's what's missing from the conversation: real world data. The DMF scientists seem to have gotten lost in the matrix of computer models and spreadsheets, forgetting that there is an army of data collectors testing our waters daily, commercial crabbers. We work up and down the coast, hauling gear, observing the water, and handling crabs daily. And we know what we are seeing: more crabs. Landings from 2023 and 2024 show an increase in blue crab abundance, yet instead of acknowledging that, the DMF is pushing forward with restrictions that will cripple our ability to work. They also seem to forget that we already have conservation measures in place. Every single crab pot we put in the water has multiple coal rings and designed to let undersized crabs escape. Our industry has taken responsibility for sustainability, and we are seeing the results. If DMF truly wants to protect the resource, they should be listening to the people who are on the water every day, not just relying on complex spreadsheets. Early this winter, we had a Zoom call with other North Carolina crabbers and Duke University researchers studying the role of predation in blue crab populations. Everything eats blue crabs, everything. Blue catfish, drum, skates, dolphins, striped bass, and other predators all have a direct correlation to blue crab abundance. It was refreshing to talk with scientists who genuinely wanted to hear from us, and even more refreshing when their preliminary findings match what we are seeing on the water. The reality is this: North Carolina is not a pond. Every river, sound, bay, creek tells a different story about blue crab populations. If we still actively tag blue crabs like we used to, we might better understand this underwater story too, rather than trying to manage an ever-changing fishery with outdated models and bad assumptions. We have been down this road before. In 2020, when the last round of restrictions came, we were told it would help the crab population rebound, but the real threats were water quality decline, habitat loss, and unchecked predators weren't addressed. Instead, the DMF continues to ignore patterns of blaming crabbers for forces beyond our control. What we need is a real independent stock assessment, not another bureaucratic exercise in targeting working watermen. We need policies that address the actual causes of blue crab declines, habitat loss, predator populations, and water quality, rather than regulations that crush small businesses and force us out of the industry. People of North Carolina deserve access to fresh local seafood, and we as commercial crabbers deserve a seat at the table. Policies are made to put us out of business. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Romano. Lastly, to Mr. Ingraham.
He lived.
What's that?
He lived.
Can I speak? Can I speak?
What's your name?
So I'm Tara Foreman from Captain Neal Seafood in Columbia, North Carolina. And first I would like to address the harvest. So while the 2024 numbers are not complete, I do have the 2024 numbers from the division up until November, December without handwritten tickets. And the total is 17,719. Well, last year, some people, the North Carolina stock was at its peak. So you had some dealers that had 43 lay days, not because the stock wasn't there, it was because the market wasn't there. And I've talked to crabbers and dealers from all the way down from Wilmington to Currituck, and I averaged that there's probably about 225 lay days. If you would put that number back in, we would probably be around 24 to 25 million pounds harvested, which would be higher than the last 10 years. It would be equal to 2024 and 2025, 2014, and 2015 would be a little bit above it, but we would be 2013, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 20, 21, 22, and 23. So if there is no juvenile recruitment and there is no female abundance, where did the crabs come from? We're basing our stuff off of 1970 fish surveys that were meant for striped bass and herring. So the crab information that you get off of those are like a bycatch. And I hear over and over and read over and over that the division knows that we need a dedicated blue crab survey, but there is no money and funding for it to get accurate data. However, just because the division doesn't have any money doesn't mean that they need to make regulations to destroy the industry, and it would destroy the industry. Crabbers would lose their homes, people would lose their businesses. The economic impact that it would have in North Carolina, North Carolina and other states would be grave. You have two of the largest picking houses in two tier 1 counties that there's either crabbing or farming in those counties, and that economic impact there would be great. Also, I talked to the scientist that failed the stock review. So I asked him a couple of questions. How common is it for a state-funded multi-year assessment to fail peer review? It's uncommon and needs to be fixed. Do you think that the marine fisheries should use 2018 stock assessment to make any management decisions? No. DMF states on a fishery dealer report right here that the blue crab is on the rebound. This is 2024. The blue crab is on the rebound. This is the marine fisheries. And now we're told that we're overfished, and that if we don't make these grave regulations, that the population is going to keep declining. That is not true. You see it in harvest numbers. You see it in the numbers. We are above 10 years. So I asked him, did he think that the stock was on the rebound, and he also said yes. So he said not to make any management decisions until they went back and fixed these items. The easiest thing would be to go back and fix the items so we can have accurate data, not make decisions based on stuff that is not accurate. And also, I hope tonight that y'all take the same approach as the Northern, and that you vote that nothing be done right now. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of the public comment period. And so we can open up the floor to questions for division staff on the presentation from committee members and items of discussion at committee members. Okay.
Well, just the 2026 FMP, what is the stock assessment? What data would it?
So currently, when we talk about the FMP, it's proposed to begin in 2026. For that, we're planning on doing an updated, new benchmark stock assessment. That is main priority right now. As soon as we get a stock assessment scientist, we plan to start that immediately.
But what year would that be for 2024, 2025?
2024, the most accurate data we have at the time of the start of the assessment.
Other questions for staff?
Fred, I don't.
Why don't you start with one?
Already heard quite a bit about the stock assessment. I've looked at the updated stock assessment of the previous stock assessment. I was involved when the last minute was adopted. There were numerous problems pointed out by the peer review, the 2018 stock assessment. And although they did approve it for management, they said specifically, do not advocate using this for the entire 5-year period. And they strongly recommend, not just recommend, they strongly recommended an update to base management decisions on. And of course, the update failed peer review probably because of many of the concerns that the original peer reviewers pointed out. I also spoke with a gentleman who did the desk review of the updated stock assessment, and that his biggest concern was model that would apply to the 2018 stock assessment as well as the update, in my opinion, because they're the exact same stock assessment. Take 3 years added. So got a ton of concern with stock assessment. One of my major concerns is you started this stock assessment in 95 at the peak, the highest landings we've ever had in this state. I mean, that seems inappropriate in itself to me, because all we did in that stock assessment is a decline. The model never saw the stock at a lower level than at its highest that it's ever been in the state. And I noted in the update, one of the points that division staff pointed out, it says note that the current assessment as well as the benchmark cover a relatively limited time period of declining recruitment and spawning abundance. This type of one-way trip is indicative of uninformative data. I just listened to you tell me a few minutes ago that the data is informative, but in the stock assessment, it says it's indicative of uninformative data. There's a lot of confusion here. Not saying anybody's trying to mislead them, but what we know is we don't know a lot about them. Everything I've read is real hard to assess blue crabs. The peer reviewers pointed out multiple times concerned with the reference, especially for natural mortality. They asked division staff to run another model, a higher natural mortality that aligned more with other states. When they did, abundance, boom, shot up. And that's how sensitive these things are to the assumptions that are made in them. They ended after indicative and of uninformative data. It says, and suggests that the results should be interpreted with caution. That's for both of these stock assessments. And all we're asking you to do is to do just what it says in your stock assessment. Use some caution. Look at what's happened in the fishery. You adopted management measures. 2021, they were implemented, meant to reduce harvest. Harvest reduced, and then it went up. This past year, it near about doubled from what it was 2 years ago. What's it going to do this year? We don't know yet. This could be a short-term trend. It could be the beginning of a long-term trend. It could show you that management is working, and we're going to take a knee-jerk reaction and do something else when we're already seeing a positive sign. And I know you say we're halfway through this 10-year. We're only 4 years into the process. We got 10 years to rebuild the stock. This data suggests that we may have ended overfishing. If we did, with the ability blue crabs have to reproduce, by the end of that 10 years, we could exceed the 63, 64 million females. We don't know. And that is what I really get frustrated with, is there should be more we don't know in that presentation, because the truth is we really don't know about it. We do know that the stock has declined. Absolutely, it declined from the peak highest it's ever been. How long can a stock maintain that level? You know, it had to decline. It looks like it's increasing now. Every crabber I've talked to, I had crabbed in about 5 years, but every crabber I've talked to said, hey, the last couple of years, we get better and better. I don't know if your data is showing that in your sampling. We really didn't get any presentation of what your sampling has showed in 2023, 2024. I just wish we had more information if we were going to do this. Now, I'll tell you flat out, I don't believe that the adaptive management passed in the last amendment allows you to do anything without an updated stock assessment. I've let the division know that. I won't vote for anything. I also don't believe that state law allows us to have an FMP without a stock assessment. I won't vote for anything. But if I didn't believe that, I would still be here saying, what the heck are we doing? We don't know anything. The reason state law requires a stock assessment, you had to have a start and a finish point. You have to say the stock is here. Here's why we're doing management, and we're trying to get to here. We don't have either of those. And I just, even if I thought the stock was in trouble, I would have a hard time agreeing to do anything when you don't have that, because that's the basis for fisheries management. You're gonna lose respect to these people in this room. You've already lost respect to most of them. I just listened to Joe Romano, who came into this management process a few years ago, willing to work with anybody at the division and help out. He jumped on committees. Brother Sam was on the commission. And now they got a bad taste in their mouth of what's been done the last couple of years. Talked to Keith Bruno from the Northern Committee a couple of weeks ago, same thing. Keith used to be willing to work with anybody at the division, do anything, meet in the middle. They're not. So I can sit here and pick on stock assessment. I've got that after note after note. I can tear it apart all night. I don't really have to because we don't have. I would like to know how you all think we can use adaptive management without an updated stock assessment, because I was there when this was approved. I read it multiple times. I read it on the screen a few minutes ago. It requires an update. After the update, it says, hey, if the stock is overfished, you can do this. If it's not overfished, you can do this. We don't know. So how can we just use adaptive management when those requirements were built into it? There's a reason they required an updated stock assessment. It wasn't so you could dismiss the fact that you don't have it, just go on and do adaptive management. It was contingent on the results of that assessment, in my opinion. And that's the main question I have right now is how y'all feel like you can just do this, use adaptive management when you have nothing to base it on, which was required.
So for clarification, just as you said, so the benchmark stock assessment was done in 2018, and that was dated through 2016.
Yes.
So the updated stock assessment is just that. It's an update. It's the same model, the same formula, nothing can be changed. All we did was add 6 more years of data to it. And that's when we started seeing the issues. Because, you know, usually when you add more data to any type of formula or assessment, you get a more accurate representation of what you're looking for. So going back to your discussion of, you know, why do we go back to say 1994, 1995? The reason that the original benchmark went back that far is because that's when the trip ticket program started. So we needed something to compare it to. And that's something that was consistent throughout the years. And we do have, you know, trip ticket data from say the 50s. However, it's nowhere near the same as the trip ticket program that we have now.
We just went back to 1950 on Striped Velvet. I heard Pam harp on it when we were talking about it at our meeting. It's like it. I'll tell you what Jeremy told me the other day. He feels like he sits in here and he's sitting in court and getting one side of the story because y'all are making a case for what we want is the whole story. We want the uncertainty. We want the certainty. We want all of it. We don't want y'all to come in here and defend your position. We want you to come in here and educate us as advisors so we can make an educated decision. And I understand what you're saying, but sure, the trip ticket program started. Some of them started 94, some 95, some 1950. We don't understand why. I just know that I read this stock assessment, both of them. And although the peer reviewers approved the first one, they weren't jumping up and down about it. They just kind of pointed out that it was better than the traffic light approach that we had prior. They had a ton of concerns about the reference points. They made a lot of suggestions on reference points that should be used. It's not like they said, boy, this is a good stock assessment. They just said, hey, probably better than what you had and we'll approve it, but we certainly don't recommend that you use it for the next 5 years. They recommended the update. And like I say, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you. If you're comfortable with stock assessment, that's fine. I'm hoping Fred sees some of the issues with it, but that's fine too if he doesn't. I've got a lot of concerns about it. And the reason is it impacts me. It impacts the people I represent. It means more to us. That uncertainty, when y'all accept it, it scares the heck out of it. Because you put us out of work and then come back and say,
If I can ask a question real quick, would you repeat what you just said? That by law, you can't update the 2016 model, that you have to use current
So
numbers in the old model.
no, so the benchmark stock assessment update that was completed
Right.
with data through 2022 was simply just an update.
Okay.
It was the same model.
Okay.
So we had those same concerns. We are concerned about the benchmark. We are concerned about the update. However, we're looking at the long-term trends, and we just see the declines in not only the commercial landings, which, let's be honest, there could be numerous reasons. It could be just completely market. It's water quality. It could be diseases that happen. There's a lot of things that are outside of our ability to manage. As fisheries managers, our tool bags are very thin. Pretty much all we have is just reducing harvest, just reducing the number of crabs that we are taking out of the population. Now, when we're seeing these long-term declines, we're also seeing these long-term trends that we're seeing in our independent for like recruits, we're seeing declines in that as well. That's concerning because in combination, that provides strong evidence of a low overall population. Now, I would like to reiterate, we are concerned about the update, and it is not used in this. However, the data trends is what we're basing this management off of. And going back to, the authority that adaptive management allows us. So the statement that you brought up is, that we have to have another stock assessment. That's not before adaptive management can be used. We are required to have an updated assessment before we have a new amendment. So within that.
Can you bring adaptive management that was passed? You had it up on the screen earlier.
I can tell you what slide it is. Adaptive management should be, look at slide 14.
Right, now, number one, does update the stock assessment at least once in between full reviews. There's a reason this is A and B under it, not number two.
But correct, this is not a full review. This is just adaptive management. A full review would be the next amendment, which would be Amendment 4.
Update the stock assessment, right? It requires.
Before a full review. So before Amendment 4, we have to have the stock assessment.
You updated it in between full reviews, which is in between the 5-year period. That's what that means.
Correct. We did an update, which is not approved for management.
Right now, A and B are there for a reason. They are dependent on number one. If not, it would be 1, 2, 3. A and B are dependent. Listen, if means if the stock is overfished. When this was passed, we had the previous stock assessment and knew it was overfished. If means the results of that updated stock assessment. It has to. It can't mean anything else. There would not be an if there if it weren't dependent on that stock assessment. That's what A and B, they both have if, right?
So the updated stock assessment 1 is not approved for management. And even if it was, it did show that we are overfishing and overfishing was occurring. So then we go back to the benchmark stock assessment, which was peer reviewed and peer approved for management.
Anything
And
in here that says you go back to the benchmark, it tells you that you can either adjust it in our favor or more restrictive based on the results of that updated stock assessment.
which both showed overfishing and overfishing is occurring.
Viable measure, including those not explored in this paper with the ability to achieve sustainable harvest. And it says, as defined in the stock assessment. How are you going to find out if something has the ability to achieve sustainable harvest if you don't have it in a stock assessment? That's why it says right there in parentheses, as defined in the stock assessment. Every piece of this is dependent on a stock assessment that we do not have.
Correct. So we revert to the current stock assessment we do have, which is the benchmark.
And the peer reviewers
advise
you not to use that
for the update,
for
not
5 years.
not the benchmark.
The benchmark advise you not to use that for 5 years.
Correct. And currently, this is the best data that we have at this time. So that's why we're reverting back. And so when you start looking at a harvest reduction, I can't just pull a number out the air. We got to say, if we are going to shoot for something, let's shoot for a number that we go back to. And that's when we go to the next slide.
I get that if you want to do something, you find a way to do it, but all of this is the adaptive management framework. It is all set and dependent on an updated stock assessment. And that's, you don't have to agree with me. That's my opinion. Even the part at the bottom requires you to go back to number 2, which says as defined in the stock assessment. What this says, if you're going to use adaptive management, you have to use something quantifiable that will address sustainable harvest. And you don't know what sustainable harvest is because we don't have a stock assessment. I mean, I don't see how anybody doesn't see that, but we can agree to disagree on that if that's where you're at. But all of this is based on something. There's a reason. We need to know what sustainable harvest is if you're going to adopt something that's quantifiable and going to achieve it. It says right there, to achieve sustainable harvest. You don't know what sustainable harvest is. You don't know what the stock is right now. Right?
If going off the previous benchmark, it's still overfished and overfishing is occurring.
For 2016,
Correct, as of 2016.
this ain't 2016.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
But landings have decreased from 2016 to now.
Right, landings have decreased.
By how much percent?
I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but the chart shows that they continue to decrease.
I got.
And again, there's many other factors.
To do with each other.
Again, landings could decrease for multiple reasons. It could be markets, it could be
Exactly.
environment, it could
Has
be
nothing
numerous
to do
things.
With how big or small the stock is.
The concern the division has,
4 million pounds. And last year it was nearly 18 million. They haven't finished yet. It was 17,700,000. But it did decrease below that. It went to 9 million in 2022, went to 15.7 in 2023 and 17,700,000 right now. It's increasing. And Fred, you may be able to help me with this, but 4 years of management, you adopt the harvest reduction, wouldn't you expect to see harvest drop first 2 years or first year at least? And then if the stock expanded, you would see an increase in landings. Participants hasn't increased, trips haven't increased. I've got all the data. All we saw was an increase in landings the last 2 years, and we're only 4 years into management. I feel strongly that you just keep adopting one thing after another. We adopted the last measures in 18. Then in 2020, we adopted more that were implemented in January 2021. Here we are, we're going to be 7 years in and we've changed management twice and we're going for a third time. I mean, give it a chance to work. Monitor it. If we hadn't seen the increases the last 2 years, I still wouldn't believe you were legally allowed to do what you're doing, but I probably wouldn't be as aggravated about it. But I just know what crabbers are seeing. I know what the landings are. I have no idea what your sampling showed for 23, 24. I'm going on what I know, and we're seeing an increasing trend. Everybody I've talked to has seen it. And I'm just struggling without a stock assessment. Again, I sat here the last meeting. We talked about oysters and clams, no stock assessment, no recreational data. We're talking about it again. We need to do better. And I know y'all want to do better. I'm not, but this stock isn't about to go and collapse. Yes, you say a decline is concerning. A decline is concerning. Our statute doesn't say when something's concerning, go crazy. Our statute defines sustainable harvest. It defines overfished. It defines overfishing. And all of those are based on the results of a stock assessment. It also requires a stock assessment for multi-use species. There's a reason. We need that information before we take stuff away from people. And that's where I'm at now. I can't get over the lack of data and the high degree of uncertainty over and over again that we keep talking about, and we're destroying fishery after fishery. That's.
Folks have some comments, just if folks have some comments or questions for Robert, Wayne. No, not from the audience, just from our committee. Not audience participation, right?
I don't have any. I got some statements.
And just addressing a little bit of some of Glenn's comments, maybe some of the public comment, like some of the other sources of other things that may be impacting the stock that Mr. Romano brought up in his comments. Just first and foremost, the landings trends are really challenging to interpret. They're almost never a great indicator of stock condition, right? There's a lot of reasons that landings can change. We've talked about many of them. It's very difficult to track blips and landings up or down and say that's an indication that the stock is great or not so great. The stock assessment process in and of itself, when we're trying to fit a model to count fish, count crabs in this case, And more importantly, what those models are trying to do is predict what those counts are going to look like if we fish it a certain way. It's incredibly hard, right? And there's lots of assumptions that go into those models, and some of the input variables that are key that we know of already, that Glenn's already, or that he's already referred to, is, you know, things like estimates of natural mortality, which is one of the hardest things that we can ever try to measure, because we never see it, right? These animals die, and you never see it. And so you're trying to quantify a process that you can't see. And so, you know, when we do, I sit on the South Atlantic Council Science and Statistical Committee, where we're reviewing the assessments of all the federally managed fish. And, you know, those assessments that we review are some of the most robust models that we have. They're the models on the leading edge of science within globally within the world that we see, and those models are still very challenging to interpret. And you know, these are for some really well understood fish species. Blue crab are notoriously difficult to model. Most of the invertebrates, right, are really difficult to model. And so, you know, the only thing that gives me pause in looking at the condition of the stock is looking at the long-term trends in the fishery independent survey data and seeing low numbers of adults and low numbers of recruits that back 20 years ago, they were catching them in those surveys, right? And they're not seeing them with those same numbers anymore. And at the federal level, again, we've got really robust models. They're well informed, good data that goes into those models. And sometimes, right, the models have the same kind of specification errors that these do. There's some things that concern us when we start to look at those models. I haven't seen the blue crab model, so I don't know what it looks like, but we often lean back on those independent surveys. Mainly what we want to see is we want to see the models estimates of stock size, right? At least tracking abundant surveys are saying at least in the same direction. And when they don't, it gives us a lot of pause. And sometimes we just don't have a good model at all. And so, you know, I understand what you're saying. And I'm not making an argument to do one thing or another, you know, but just kind of coming back to the adaptive management, you know, in this case, right, they did an update assessment. That model had some concerns that the peer reviewers pointed out. So we don't recommend using for management. So we don't have that. So the division is going to go back to the benchmark and say, okay, the benchmark told us this. And but what if we were in a case where where the fishery independent indices, in the absence of a stock assessment, basically went to zero, right? And the landings were basically going to zero, right? Would we still say that we can't do anything until we have an assessment, right? If those indicators were so strong, I'm not saying that they are right now. If you make your assessment, right? Right. So, you know, in other words, if you had that situation, you don't even have the data to run an assessment, right? You got to do something.
I get that. So, but we're not in that situation. We have a process. We have a process for a reason. We have state laws. We have them for a reason. And what we're trying to achieve is sustainable harvest. But we have to interpret sustainable harvest first. What is it? And I remember when I worked at the division, I don't know, do y'all say this now, but I was told by staff at the division that in school, they were taught that 2 mature female blue crabs, if they were successfully spawned, could replenish the entire Pamlico Sound if it was depleted. And that always stuck in my head as amazing reproductive capability. So I don't know how many females we got out there, but I know there are far more than 2. Millions. And if everything hits just right, like it did for those few years when we had our peak, you got to remember, we got 75 years of data and only 10 years were over 40 million pounds harvested, and 6 of those 10 years were in this 22-year period. Now, that model, I don't understand the computer model, but I know it's never seen the stock below. But I also know in 1950, we're catching 6 million pounds, and my granddaddy used to talk about there weren't no crabs. That model should see this, so it can realize that this has happened before and that there's natural fluctuations in the stock. Not saying it'll say it's overfished or it won't, I don't know what it'll say, but I know what it's got to say if it sees this. From the highest we've ever had downhill. Even if it hadn't got 9 million pounds, it would still freak them out because all it knows is that little bit of time you put in it. That's concerning. I mean, like I say, I'm not a biologist. I got enough common sense to know that model has only seen a stock at its very peak and start down. And that's what those peer reviewers, or well, no, it was division staff that pointed out. This is a one-way trip and it is indicative of uninformative data. Now, I'm concerned about the stock. I will not tell anybody in here that the stock didn't decline. I said earlier, it probably did. But is it at a point that's unsustainable? That is the question we are tasked. You're tasked with by law, the commission, all of us are tasked with figuring out. Is the current population sustainable? Are those spawners enough to produce recruits that will replenish the spawners we're removing and that are dying off from age? Do we know that?
Well, the other, coming back to some of the topics that, Mr. Romano brought up in terms of, other things that are happening, right, that are not in control of the people in this room, in terms of water quality issues or habitat loss, warming oceans, winters are a lot warmer in the ocean now than they seeing. And so what we're seeing regionally, not just here, in North Carolina, but in the South Atlantic and the Northern Gulf of Mexico as a whole, is we're seeing a lot of species that have shown these trends over the last 10 or 15 years that are showing trends where the stock itself is just not as productive as it was before, likely due to many of these things that are out of our control. And so what it says is that we just have to, we have to adapt to a stock that's less productive, right? And so if we can't remove the same amount of harvest from a stock that's less productive, it seems penal to the industry, but it's just the fact that the stock isn't productive the way it was 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago. And blue crab's not, exclusive to that. Seeing it with many of the deep water snapper grouper species. Red snapper is an exception, but we're seeing it across the board with those species. The flounder issues that we're seeing here in terms of low recruitment, they're seeing in South Carolina, they're seeing in Florida, they're seeing in Texas, they're seeing in Louisiana, they're seeing the same patterns. And so the mechanisms that are driving lower productivity in these stocks are hard to pinpoint. But if that's the case, right, you have to adjust to a different setting. I don't know that that's where we are with blue crab. It's just those are, they're things we can't address necessarily, but we have to address that they could be impacting the productivity of the stock.
We have adjusted that.
All we can do as managers, or they can do as managers.
Yeah, but you get out of the fishery. I used to fish 500 crab pots every single day. I don't anymore. There's a lot of people, according to their data, that don't anymore. So as the stock becomes lower or less productive, that's natural reductions that we take because we go do something else. It's not like everybody who crabbed in 1995 when we were catching 40 to 60 million pounds is still crabbing. We fishermen don't do that. We're not recreational. We go out there for one reason. If a trip isn't profitable, it isn't a good trip. You will never hear me say any day on the water is a good day. A recreational fisherman will say it over and over again. It is all about covering my fuel bill, my bait bill, and paying my bills. That's what it's about. If I can do that, I get out of a fishery and go to another. And when that fishery rebounds, move back into it. Any of these guys will tell you that you don't go out day after day and not make a profit and stay a commercial fisherman. You can't do it. So I agree with everything you said, but we don't know that this stock is less productive. We don't know. We have seen the stock at very low places before without doing anything drastic, and it rebounded. I talked about that at the last meeting when I wasn't on the committee, when Fred was nice enough to let me interject. And I've just grown up in this. I've heard it all my life. I heard my granddaddy and his brothers, they were all fishermen. They talked about this. The stock was really low, weren't any crabs, and then all of a sudden, boom, there was. And your data shows the same thing. 6 million pounds, all of a sudden, boom, 13 million, 20 million, 30 million, 40 million. And then, yeah, it came back down. I think it's natural fluctuation, but my question is always going to be, is the current level unsustainable? Because that's what we are tasked with figuring out. And y'all can't answer that. And it's unfortunate that you can't, but you can't.
I'm curious, Glenn, you mentioned the fact that you used to crab pot and fish 500 pots a day, and then you got out of the fishery. And you also mentioned that fishermen kind of do that. They fluctuate when fisheries are profitable, they get in them, and when they're not profitable, they get out of them. And I'm curious what the reasoning you had, and like personal stuff, don't feel like
I didn't
complicated to
leave
answer.
because I wasn't making money. I left because I took a job with the NCFA. I was driving to Raleigh in the morning after staying up shedding crabs all night. And I'm gonna tell you, after 3 days in Raleigh and shedding crabs 7 nights a week, I did that in a year and a half and I just couldn't do no more. And I was more passionate about the NCFA at the time, and I decided to put my fishing aside for a while.
Yeah.
But I was still making a good living crabbing, and matter of fact, a better living than I'm making at the NCFA.
Well, isn't say we have a reduction in participation, and that is signal then that perhaps we do have a drop in population?
I've said several times already, I believe the stock, but decline from its highest abundance ever is concerning, but the question is it sustainable? And because that's what we manage for, sustainability. And my personal opinion is we got plenty of crabs out there to reproduce and replenish what's being taken if conditions are right, but they're not always right. Most of our recruitment comes in the fall. These crabs fall, eggs go out in the ocean, larva hangs out in the ocean till it's pushed back into the estuaries. If it ain't pushed into the estuaries, we don't get them. So it fluctuates. Every year is different. And the right weather pattern, we have a lot of crabs, wrong weather pattern, we don't have plenty.
I'm curious with that, the kind of fluctuation in conditions and kind of the lack of recruitment when conditions aren't right. Is there not some level of need for fisheries managers to kind of, in periods of low recruitment like that, to take that into consideration and potentially have harvest reductions like we're talking about now? Like if recruitment really does fluctuate like that and environmental conditions do, like even if they are the cause of that low recruitment, just because fishing pressure isn't the reason for the low recruitment doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have to take fishing pressure into account when we're determining that.
You're right to a certain degree, but if you take, I mean, unfortunately, y'all only show us data from 95. I've got the data from 1950 on, and I've got the knowledge from that my family passed on. And we didn't make any drastic changes that caused the stock down to 60 million pounds of harvest. These crabs did it on their own. And yes, it's good to consider that. And I'm not saying that you can't manage a stock if you're concerned. But again, if you propose something drastic, you take a guy in Fort Sam in the spring, and if he can't harvest female crabs, he'll be getting a bushel a day. A truck will not come down and pick up a bushel of jimmies if it doesn't have that other 15 bushels of hen crabs that he's supposed to be catching.
So I actually think
It just seems like we're always, oh my God, the sky is falling. We got to do something. We got to consider something. Blue crabs is one species I can say has an ability to do what we can't do. We can do anything we want. I've been crabbing when I thought there was no crabs, and 2 weeks later, my pot slammed full, and every crabber in this room has. It is amazing the way they just, boom, there's crabs everywhere. And I wish y'all consider that and understand the capability of these species. You're a blue crab biologist. You know what they can do if everything works out. And the sky is not falling. Landings have increased. The guys are seeing a positive sign. I don't know that that'll continue. We may come back 2 years from now and I said, man, I wish we'd have done something. I don't know. But we are seeing positive signs right now, and you all, again, cannot tell me that we are at an unsustainable level right now. And that's, like I say, that's where I'm gonna be at all night. I made up my mind way before I came here. I read every document y'all have ever produced, whether it's from Blue Crab or any other bit. I'm not a stock assessment scientist, not a biologist. I do talk to them. I ask them questions about this stuff that I don't understand. Now, I feel like I got a fairly good understanding of the statements, of the crab capability of what's going on in the fishery. And I do not see anything crazy going on in this fisheries.
So Glenn, you know, I respect the heck out of your opinion on things, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about stock assessment, shouldn't talk about anything like that. I would be remiss if everybody on the committee didn't have a chance to talk about maybe not just the stock assessment and whether or not it's accurate or not accurate, or if the blue crab stock is actually in decline or not. One of the things that I think has kind of become an unfortunate part of fisheries management, and it's completely understandable, is that when we bring something like this out to the public, we get a lot of that pushback from the public, and again, completely understandable why we would, that the data is not accurate, the stock assessment's not reality, and while that's good feedback for us to have, and hopefully we can address some of the concerns that people have brought up, I don't want to lose the opportunity to actually discuss some of the options that are available for adaptive management. And you mentioned someone in Core Sound that the division's preliminary recommendation that would put them completely out of business. That's exactly the kind of input that we need from the public, from the advisors, and everything. And that kind of input is very, very helpful for us. And while it's completely valid for you to talk about the stock assessment and not be in agreement with the results of it, and even to not agree that we can use adaptive management to manage the blue crab fishery right now, that's again a perfectly valid opinion for you to have. I don't want us to not talk about the options just because we do need to learn about that for sound fishermen who would be put out of business by this recommendation, because this is just our preliminary recommendation. This is what the division has, after looking at the data, after talking to some fishermen, talking to dealers, this is our preliminary recommendation. It is not our final recommendation. It's not necessarily what the commission will vote on, not necessarily what they'll ultimately adopt or anything like that. This is something for us this is where we're at right now, and we would like input to see if there are other options out there, other options that we've talked about in the decision document that would be less harmful to crabbers and the fishery itself than what the division recommendation is. And even if it's not something that's technically listed as an option, like the options are actually kind of limitless as far as when the season closure could occur, if there were bushel limits, what they would be. Like I don't want us to lose sight of that.
Yeah, a lot of the options that are in the table are based on input that they had from stakeholder work groups and so on. So just hearing more of that, even if the recommendation from this advisory committee to the commission is not to make any more, not to make any cuts in terms of trying to reduce harvest now, but at least have an open discussion about, okay, if you were going to recommend a 5 or 10 or 15% reduction in harvest down the road, what are options here that are even workable? And so that kind of discussion is important.
And it may be, I'm trying to find out stuff, and then I would encourage y'all, I mean, you got trip ticket days, it's got 1s, 2s, and 3s on it. You can look at area, I'm assuming y'all know what 1s, 2s, and 3s are. So take 3s, and if you're looking at messing with females, look at the 3s for each area and see who catches what. I mean, it's really that simple to know who it's going to impact. And remember, we always talk about females. As far as I'm concerned in reproduction, a male's pretty important. Maybe I'm biased because I'm a male, but males are pretty important. So you take and shove all of us in the spring to where the males are. And we catch those males up, and just about time all these females are becoming mature, getting ready to shed, they ain't a male for them to pair up. And these males carry a female around for weeks sometimes. If they get a hold of her, they don't let her go until she sheds and they breed. It's not like they're bouncing from one a day to the next and the next and the next. I don't know how that affects their ability to spawn. Maybe they spawn later after they've shed. But you need to think about stuff like that. When you start managing by sex, I don't know how you're going to impact it, but a crabber has got to go crabbing. If he's got to take his pots, I had a pot, put 150 pots on my trailer. I put 60 some in my boat. That's over 200 pots I can move. If I'm within 2 hours, I can move 600 pots a day. All right. I could move 600 pots from Core Sound to Neuse River in one day. You're going to force me to do that. You're going to put more pressure on that area. And then you're going to come back and say, oh, we got to where's Jimmy's? We're going to say, well, you made us catch Jimmy's. It just seems like you've got to really think all this through. And I just feel like we always take a knee-jerk reaction. Like I say, we just implemented this 2021. It's the beginning of 2025. It hasn't been that long. And I don't know that management just happened overnight. I mean, management, it actually doesn't produce anything. It saves a few and you hope that they produce something when everything is right. They could be sitting there right now waiting for the right weather conditions to boom, produce millions of crabs. I don't know, but I don't like a knee-jerk reaction. I don't like every couple of years you change management because you never take nothing on. So you put management in place, you tell me it didn't work. Why not scrap everything you just did and throw it out and start back where we were? We're going to start back with the same stock assessment. Put me back to square one too. Take those extra call rings out. Let me harvest every more female, whatever you, and then figure out what to do. But that never happened. You do one management measure. 2 years later, you do another. 4 years later, you do another. And before it's this long, complex bunch of rules that we have to follow, and you keep telling us it didn't work. And I'm not knocking y'all. I know, listen, everything I got in this book came out of your stock assessments. I'm not saying there's not transparency. Everything I needed to tear the stock assessment apart is in it. Everything I need to support it is in it. All those things. I'm just saying we need to work together. We need to figure out what works and what doesn't for the industry and the stock. And I know this is part of the process, but we're frustrated. Fishermen, I hear it constantly. You know, we got guys that are already talking to attorneys. Let's just put the brakes on. Figure out what in the world we need to do, if anything. This stock ain't gonna collapse 2 years from now, is it? I mean, have you seen a sign that it's just gonna go away?
No, so the last 2 years.
Can I say one thing? I've listened to, I hate to say it, one member dominate a conversation for 45 minutes and nobody else in the whole group has been able to speak. And sooner or later, everybody needs to express their opinion on this and not have one person repeat the same thing, argument over and over again. I am finished.
Tom, I haven't heard you raise your hand. If you want to speak, speak.
I'll say something. With respect to the warning current rules. And it's something everybody can contribute to. Across the board, everybody's the same, doesn't matter. That with black and brown sponge. And you got right now a rule set from the 1st of April to the end of April. Black and brown sponge. Answer me, how many black and brown sponges you've seen in a month of April?
I don't have that data.
I'm gonna help you out. 0. Okay, the way the system works, the feelers come out when it's 52 degrees. They move around, they pair up with what they can. And the red drum come in, the feelers scatter. That's over with. Then the next set comes in, is a sponge crab. They're just beginning to burst out. There ain't no black or brown sponge in it in the month of April. But when it was proposed 20 years ago, because I was the one that proposed it 20 years ago, was return black and brown sponge to the water on a year-round basis. Then you would have some effect. Right now, you got 0 effect.
So To address your point, yes, the management did go in place for the black and brown sponge from April 1st to April 31st. And I can't speak on the management that happened at that time or how that came about through the MFC and got voted through. Now, some of the options.
It's ineffective. It does nothing.
Correct. And so possibly we can look at doing protection of sponge crabs, whether it's black and brown, whether it's all sponge crabs, but we can't do that through adaptive management because it's not quantifiable. We just don't have the data.
You said one of your problems is you want to protect females, spawning females.
Correct. So
Black and a brown sponge, that's a spawning females.
correct, but we do not have the data to quantify what the benefits would be from protecting just the black and brown sponge of females. So the division has taken the stance of trying to focus our efforts instead of trying to do an overall harvest reduction of everything like we've been doing for years and years. We know we have an issue with recruitment. So we're going to focus our efforts on protecting females because hopefully the more females we protect, the more females would enter that sponge stage. Because we do have evidence showing that protecting of just sponge crabs may be not as effective as we would like it to be due to a lot of the crabs either shedding the sponge once they got caught due to stress. Even if they get thrown back, they might shed and have to start all over again. Plus, a crab only sponges out for about 2 weeks. So essentially, even though you threw that crab back, you might just catch that crab a few days later and it would be legally harvested. So that's why we've kind of tried to take a directive approach and say, you know what, we know we have an issue with recruitment. So our attempts is to try to make the smallest impact to the fishermen and just focus our efforts on protecting mature females only, hoping that more of them can get to the sponge stage to have recruits. And to get back to your comments a little bit about like measuring the number of threes.
The point being, you've had a rule on the books for 20 years that's had zero effect. It done nothing. Why is it still there?
I don't have the evidence showing that it has not done nothing.
Don't y'all still sample? When I worked at the division, we sampled and we recorded orange sponge, brown sponge, black sponge.
Correct, we still do.
And in Gore Sound, we saw brown and black sponges in the spring too. Yeah, you know, I mean, but, yeah, we did, but it's not quantifiable.
So quantifiable meaning we have to put we have to put harvest reduction or harvest impacts that we can quantify to a number. And you know, just being that they're black and brown sponge, that could mean 1 million recruits. It could mean 1 recruit. We don't know. And for that reason, we can't address that at this time. That's something that we can address during the next amendment process.
Or suggestion.
And yeah, absolutely.
Misunderstood you and thought we didn't have data on sponge.
No. So we have data. We have data. But the adaptive management, that second part that I was talking about, that holds us accountable to anything that's quantifiable. That's why we aren't looking at effort right now. We can't look at pot limits. We can't look at time limits because we don't have that certainty of effort and what it will do. You know, because effort changes from day to day, from week to week, from month to month. The guys that normally fish 600, I don't know, you might just fish 400 next day. We might have hypoxia. You picked up all your pots, moved them to a different location. You might have stopped and became a professional deer hunter for a while. That emphasis on effort is we just don't have a clear understanding. So we can't make that quantifiable, so it cannot be used with adaptive management. And just to get back to your point before I forget about it, because I swear, buddy, I got a short-term memory. You mentioned about like the fish house data, and we do use that. You know, like I do and everybody in this room, crabbing is one of the most complex fisheries, bar none. Even when you look at just commercial landings alone, we don't land crabs by market grade, male and female. Doesn't work like that. You got 1s and 2s. Yeah, they're mainly males. Some females get mixed in. We understand that. There's a tolerance, but females especially are number 3s. But they're also coals and they're also straights and they're also mixed. And so, you know, trying to find that ratio, and that ratio changes, and it's not changing by season. It's not, you know, sometimes it does. Sometimes it just changes by markets. All of a sudden the markets in New York said, hey, I'm not taking any more bushel crabs, cull them all. Well, now they're coals, you know, and that could have happened at 4th of July. It could have happened Labor Day. It could have happened whenever. So we're constantly out there trying to monitor that, and it's something extremely difficult to do.
Yeah, and I get that, but you also sample the boxes of coals, so you get an idea percentage of.
Correct.
Most of the time, even when we're separating coals, unless a Jimmy crab is dead or paper shell, it's gonna go in 1s and 2s because you get more money for them. They're going on a live market. You generally don't throw the Jimmy. So I know there's a percentage, but when I worked at the division, we kind of went through those boxes to give you an idea of what percentages may be, but I do understand what you're saying. It's complicated, just.
And absolutely, and with limited staff and limited resources, I mean, we also have other priorities that we have to take place. So we try to fit in as much fish house sampling as we can. But on top of that, we have a fifth of the number of participants. We have less trips. That means trying to find these crabbers are more difficult. You know, the crab houses that I used to go to when I was a tech, you know, there would be 15, 20 people almost every single day. Now, everybody's aged out of the fishery. A lot of their guys don't go. They might just be weekend warriors now. And, you know, it looks really good on Monday. Let's go out there. Come to find out they fished on Sunday. I missed them. I couldn't make it. So that day was almost a wash. So I try to fit it with other sampling. And that happens all the time. And we're seeing that constantly. Some of our main brick places that we used to go to and rely on to say, hey, if you go here, you're probably going to get a sample. Go there and at least get several. Those brick and mortars have now broken up. A lot of these guys are now their own dealers. And so then you got to put effort into that. So then you're sitting there weighing, well, what is the technician's time better off doing? Going to one person's house and hopefully he's fishing a day. He might fish, he might not. He didn't give me a good answer whether he did or not. You know, we were better off when we were able to go to these larger businesses and get several at the same time. We got places now that they go to their house and the freezer truck picks up at their house. What time are they going to be there? I have no idea. It changes from day to day, what route that he's got, what it's going to be. You know, we might just completely miss samples. So that is a struggle that we have, is, you know, trying to monitor those trends. But we do have that long-term database that we can kind of say, oh, on average, at this time of the year, polls usually are, say, 70-30, females to males, you know, and during these times of year, it might be more of a 50-50 split. A lot of guys bushel, a lot of guys cold all year long. So we do have those shifts. And again, crabbing is extremely difficult, and everybody in this room knows it. And, you know, right now, when we're looking at adaptive management, we're looking at some sort of change that we could possibly do, because we're looking at those long-term trends. And I know that you're talking about going back to 96, maybe not be appropriate. It might not be. But then my question would be, when would be appropriate? Because we've been on a decline since then. So I can't really pick any time frame from then. I would have to go back even further. And the further we go back, really the less data, I'm not going to say the less accurate, but the less informative the data might be. You know, it might not have covered as many people. The trip tickets might not have reached as many people. The surveying might not be different. So we constantly are having those struggles. And I agree with you 100%. The division recognizes that we've had 2 good years, but that is normal, that we do see blips in it. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I hope that we ride this trend out. I hope that it continues through 2025, 2026, and 2027. And we're sitting here talking about Amendment 4 and going, you know what, let's take some things off. I would love to say that. But what's concerning is that even though we had increased numbers in 2023 and 2024, we increased numbers from the lowest on record, which was 2022, which was only 9.7 million pounds. And that's what's concerning, that, you know, we don't want to immediately jump and say, oh, it's fixed. It might be. I can't tell you that until we have another stock assessment. It might be.
I said that myself. I don't know. I just know what we're seeing the past 2 years. I know what we've seen before. I've said several times, stock absolutely declined. It declined while I was grabbing. Question is it sustainable? Is it not? That's kind of what we're tasked with. And that's what I come back to. I just don't believe that because the stock has declined, it means it's unsustainable, especially something as reproductive as crabs are. I mean, and resilient as crabs are. That's where I struggle. And
completely acceptable. And another just last issue I'm gonna bring up.
It's 8:23.
I got just one more issue.
Go ahead.
Just one more. So unfortunately, we were just dealt the hand that we were. Adaptive management is supposed to be something quick that we can make small and hopefully change. However, if we could have done something in 2021 and 2022, we probably would have at that time when we got the lowest on record. And at that time, we knew that there was going to be another update that we were going to get done. So it was kind of hopes to say, well, let's just not do anything now and push it back to 2020 to when the stock assessment was completed in 2023. And it was, we were hoping that we could use that to accurately say what we should do for overfishing and if overfishing was occurring. It didn't work out. So then it's like, well, let's start the adaptive management. We started this process in May of 2023, and this is where we got to now. This is as fast as we can move it to try to be adaptive. It's unfortunate that we didn't get it presented at the last MFC meeting, you know, so likely it could be voted on in August, and we are going to, you know, it is scheduled to start the next FMP in 2026.
Are y'all prepared to monitor trends between now and August and see if we're aligning with last year, above last year?
We will continue to monitor trends as we go on. We will continue to monitor trends.
So Pam, I'm hoping that you're gonna make a motion.
I'm
'Cause I'm
gonna
gonna
say a
need
few things and then I'm gonna make a motion.
All right,
To try to move this
just a few.
train down the track. So, so I'm gonna, I've written down a few notes. But it all boils down to this. It's like this fellow over here said. I've heard a lot of slick talk tonight, and you must have practiced that a bunch of times. That's all I'm gonna say. Yeah, you must have practiced that a lot. And, you know, I think when this whole adaptive management deal was presented to our committee not that long ago, right? Not that long ago, a few meetings ago, maybe
On this
three.
committee long.
I mean, I think that I have talked to people since then. I think this whole adaptive management is wrong, is wrong, and we shouldn't we should never have passed something like that. We need to take that away as an option for management because it's too haphazard, it's too quick. There's other things in place that does almost pretty much the same exact thing. And you only have 5 years, for crying out loud, between when these FMPs are reviewed. So do away with this whole adaptive management mess. And I'll tell you something else. We have been dominated here by a chicken little philosophy. The sky is falling. And I've been in this mess for 30 years, just listening to crap like this here, and the sky ain't fell yet. And it's not going to fall tomorrow. So, you know, and we had in 2018 Hurricane Florence. We had 2019 Hurricane Dorian. We've had other ones that have come in, landed ashore in Wilmington. Some's landed ashore at Cape Lookout. And I mean, if you don't think that affects shrimp and crabs, you've lost your cop picking mind. And you're here persecuting both the commercial fishermen. And I have had it ever since the commission, and this isn't your fault. The fault lies with Marine Fisheries Commission. And ain't nothing I can do about it. I don't have any pull with anybody. But since that flounder debacle up the road in Carolina Beach, where I saw a man die there in the floor with Doug Cross, that weren't right. And they have taken that, that wrong thing they did with flounder, the whole screwed up mess, saying, oh, the sky is falling on flounder. And they said, oh, that worked. Let's put it on blue crabs. Blue crabs, which is an annual crop. I think you can try to make your computer models work, but oh, they live 9 years. Right. I'm quite sure that there's a true bell curve for a 9-year-old roller crab. I'm quite sure of that. And also, these inlets for sponge crabs, because of course I was going to be the one persecuted over a sponge crab, which we've discussed several times right here in this committee. But yet, here we are again. Sponge crabs. Sponge crabs, they are ginormous sanctuaries around every inlet for taking sponge crabs. And most of the time, where are they spawning out at? Oak Inlet, Drum Inlet, Barden's Inlet, and Hatteras Inlet. That's where all these crabs are going. And the male crabs, which I won't say their rightful name, are on the western side of the South. I mean, they kind of come together. We discussed this for 33 years, and they're still doing the same things they were doing. You're not going to change it. But what you will change is you're going to take the livelihood away from these poor people. And I am sick and tired of sitting by and I know Fred knows I say it plenty, and I do. But somebody's got to say it. And that's all I'll say about that. So my motion is not to do anything, just like the Northern, that lady there said, because there's nothing that you have presented here tonight to warrant one thing, not one thing. Now, that's my opinion. Everybody is entitled to theirs. I've always said it. But that's my, obviously, very, very strong opinion. And let's cut it out with this smooth talking, darn chicken little philosophy that we have going on that is governing marine fisheries in this state. And let's have a hard darn look at the Marine Fisheries Commission and the ones on there that is directing you people. I love you people, and you do a good job. You obviously have practiced that one a lot. So
I've never been told I was a slick talker.
never been told that. But you're just only doing what you are told to do by them and by a faction of them, not all of them. I mean, some of them are good friends of mine on the commission. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of crazy people on there, and it has been ever since this whole flounder thing. And that's not your fault. But it's still there. It's still there, and something needs to be done about it. That's all.
Do we have a
I've got my motion. And there you go.
So the motion is to not make any recommendations for harvest restrictions? That's a motion, is to make recommendations for no further harvest restriction? Is that the motion, Pam?
Yeah, it's my motion, yes.
What about the vote in moving the vote to August?
And that too, you can
That part
put
of
that in there. That will be friendly to me, yes.
Okay.
I think that makes sense.
So we have a motion on the floor to recommend to the commission no further harvest restrictions in blue crab at this time, and to delay their vote until August to give them more time to look at the issue. We have a second. Second. Any discussion of that motion by members of the committee? Any comments or discussion of that motion? I'm not going to make a comment on the motion, but I did want to comment on one of the public comments by that really sharp young man right there in the black shirt. And one of the things that he said was why, we make these management decisions that only have 50% probability being successful, and why do we do that all the time? And we don't do that all the time necessarily in this committee, but oftentimes, because of lots of political pressure, that's often where the commission ends up, which is often the minimum that's statutorily required, is what they'll end up doing. And there's many cases where I think historically throughout North Carolina, since the Fisheries Reform Act was passed in 1997, that if the commission, which is ultimately the body that decides on preferred management measures, would have opted for something that was more than the minimum, we wouldn't be here every 3 years putting another regulation and another one and another one and another one. So part of it is because each time that a regulation is passed, has a very low probability of being successful and a very low probability of seeing the effect in any kind of short-term period of time. So adding to repeats it over and over. So
Fred, I'm gonna touch on that. I know Tom's probably gonna come to that speaker and read the text, but I don't care. We did pass a 2.4% reduction, which was just barely above the minimum, but that isn't all we did. We expanded crab sanctuary. We brought over the measures from 2 years prior. All that you all said may not be quantifiable, but will benefit this stock. We did not do the bare minimum. The quantifiable part was just above the bare minimum, but we went above and beyond that. We created crab sanctuaries that weren't there, and we expanded some that were there. Everybody keeps saying you did the least you could. You didn't. No, we didn't. We did what you all said would work, and we added a little extra to it. that you said you couldn't quantify. It weren't our fault you couldn't quantify it, but it makes sense that it'll available. It's not always the bare minimum, but when you presented up there earlier, you didn't have none of the non-quantifiable measures that and you didn't mention the revision to Amendment 2 that we had just done 2 years prior, that we carried all these management measures over. And we are doing more than that bare minimum. Whether it's enough, I don't know. Unfortunately, y'all don't either because we don't have the information, but we are doing our part. And all we expect is y'all to give us a little bit of credit for doing that and understand that we're trying. But we're trying to do it in a way that builds the stock and doesn't destroy the fishery because they are two separate things. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I hate to say I agree with Glenn on anything. We're well aware of that. I don't see where us waiting to let fisheries look at it, the commission look at it in August is a bad thing.
Other comments? Sam, comment? Okay.
I mean, I don't see any better, I mean, we see data that shows it's going down. We've got people saying there's other data. I mean, to me, it's how much risk do you take now versus later? If the other people that are in the industry that want to, are willing to take the risk, then I'm fine with the amendment. So it's fine.
Ready to call a question.
All right. Boyce,
I'll vote with the amendment.
Apagard,
I'll vote with the amendment.
Morris,
Aye.
Proctor, Ziegler, Glenn Skinner, Jeremy Skinner,
Aye.
Smith,
Nay.
Wilson, Yates, and Chair Shaw.
I'm gonna abstain. Chicken Little.
Now it's the important motion, right?
We gotta have issues from us first, yeah.
Yeah, are there any issues that this committee wants to bring to the staff for the next meeting? Next meeting will probably be summer, right? Like midsummer usually, unless we don't have one.
So the next meeting actually, because the Marine Fisheries Commission voted to move forward with Southern Flounder and send it out to the advisory committees, it'll actually be on April 8th. So it's just right around the corner.
Our next meeting is April 8th.
It is the 8th, yes. The 9th was the tentative date that we had set for them back earlier in the beginning of the year, but we've had to change them around some.
That's one page. Eight.
I had it as the night.
I didn't have it as anything.
Go to the same place.
It likely will be at the CDO in Moorhead. But I'll send all this information out to y'all probably next week.
Other comment, question?
But I mentioned before, Justin, are we gonna try to do a virtual meeting before that possibly? Or?
We probably won't move forward with that, at least not right away. Still a possibility, but not for that meeting for sure. And
Okay.
Fred, I do have one thing, and if everybody else is done, it's kind of a closing thing that I'd like to say, and I do just want to say thank you to everyone that came out tonight. Like, we do really appreciate it. We value your input, and as they've said, as people have referenced a couple of times, we're going to be working on Amendment 4 starting in 2026, and I very, very highly hope that people still continue to be engaged and speak to the division and coming and giving comment as we work towards Amendment 4, because that is incredibly valuable to us. So thank y'all.
What are you
I would
looking
echo
at
that.
Flounder?
As the-
What, do you have a sense of what that's gonna be?
You mean at the meeting?
at the April meeting.
So that's about Amendment 4, and that's a very focused amendment that is just looking at shifting the allocation that's currently scheduled for 2025 to be 60-50, so 60% commercial, 60-40, 60% commercial, 40% recreational, moving that to 50-50, so 50% commercial, 50% recreational, and
Readiness can get a hold of more, right?
it's already scheduled to take place in 2026. In Amendment 3, it's speeding it up a year.
I wish that they had to feed people. They surely don't. They don't deserve 50%.
So the Amendment 4 came out of a request from the commission back in August at their meeting
Yeah.
I'm sorry, say that one more time, I didn't hear you.
You got corruptness.
Adjourn this meeting.
Second, I will have a heart attack when I get out of here.
Yes, we can adjourn. I just wanted to also reiterate to the folks that came tonight. Comments tonight. I would encourage you guys to continue to work with the vision folks, with the biologists, and the staff, to help them identify pathways forward, help with data. And, promoting, building the collaborative relationships with the folks here at the table. Appreciate everyone.
Nothing collaborative about this process.
Okay.
We kind of knew it was going to break that way anyway, though, didn't we?
I both appreciate talking about it.
I'm glad to see that by.
Oh, look, you don't know.
Well, I've been in Wilmington last Friday.